For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played in the early title Tuesday on June 11th, 2024 between myself and the self-proclaimed future first American World Chess Champion, Hans Niemann. Now, the game that we're looking at is from the last round, the 11th and critical final round. Going into this round, I'm tied for first place with 9 points out of 10, and Hans is a half point back with 8.5 out of 10. But more importantly, I know that if I don't do well in this game, we're probably going to see a bunch of garbage on social media about how I'm afraid about Hans and how he's better than me and all this other stuff. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. All right. So the game starts with e4. Hans decides to play c5. I play this move d4. Hans takes, and I play c3. Now, after takes, we have reached the classic position from the Smith-Morra gambit. Now, this is a gambit that I played where I'm down a pawn, but white wants to develop his pieces very quickly. Now, against a seasoned player who is going to become the first American world champion, you surely expect that he can beat one of these openings, especially because I'm giving him pawn odds. So in this position, Hans continues with knight c6. I play this move knight f3, and now we get this move e6. Now, in this position, there are many ways to develop for white. In many cases, white used to almost always develop this bishop to the c4 square, but in this position, with the pawns on f7 and e6, the bishop is simply not super effective here on this diagonal. So instead, I play bishop to f4 here, trying to put pressure on this dark square diagonal instead. Hans plays the move a6, and now I play bishop e2. We get knight e7, and I play this move queen to b3. Now, the idea behind queen b3 here is that I potentially want to castle my king to either the queen side or the king side. Additionally, in the great year of 2023, I also played something very similar to this against the famous world number 2, or I guess world number 3 currently, Fabiano Caruana in the Chessable Cup, where I played the system of the Smith-Morra gambit with some success. And I remember in those games, putting the queen on b3 and castling queenside was one of the ideas that Stonefish recommended. So after queen b3, we get knight to g6. I play bishop g3, and here Hans plays bishop e7. Of course, black is trying to finish his development as well. Here I play h4 here, and now Hans plays d6. Now, h4 is a move that is very much approved by Stockfish and AlphaZero. The idea here is to try and kick this knight away from g6, and if the knight has to go backwards, I'm also taking much more space in the position. So Hans plays d6. I decide to castle, and now we get the move queen c7. Now, in this position, if black were to castle, for example, this would be a huge mistake because I can play h5, attacking this knight on g6, and if black goes knight to e5, I can trade the knights, take this knight on e5, and it's spaghetti-o time for black, because if you take the bishop, you lose the queen on d8, and with it, the game as well. So Hans plays the move queen to c7 instead. Now, obviously, if we get h5 and knight e5 and takes, black can simply take with the pawn, and there's no threat on the d file because the queen has removed itself from the d8 square. So after queen c7, I now play the move king b1. Hans goes bishop d7, and now I play this move h5, attacking the knight. Hans goes knight e5, and now I play this move h6. Now here Hans plays g6, and I continue with the move rook c1. Now you're probably wondering, why am I pushing this pawn up the board? Now, one of the most famous concepts that was discovered, I believe in the 1700s, was the famous lolly checkmate, where you put something like the queen on g7. Let me just give you guys a sample, something like this, where if you get the queen of the pawn here, this is a checkmate. It was discovered by the famous Italian painter Giambattista Lolli in the 1700s, and this is one of the reasons that I push the pawn up the board, that on top of taking space down the road, I'm going to try to go for the classic Lolli checkmate. So after g6, I play rook c1. We have this move rook to c8 played by Hans, and now I play this move rook hd1. Now I'm shifting everything away from the king side part of the board here, but I'm hopeful that when Hans castles, I'll be able to move this knight and push this f-pawn to kick the knight out of the center of the board. So Hans castles, and now I play this move knight to e1 in this position, and after knight to e1, my goal is to play for f4 to trap this knight. One sample line is, let's just say, not knight d8, sorry, something like, I don't know, queen b8. Maybe here I can play a move like f4 to trap this knight on e5. So we get knight to a5, I go queen to c2, and here Hans plays this move knight c4. Now at this point, black is clearly better as he's up a pawn with a pawn in the center of the board, and you can play for b5, b4 down the road. So here I go knight back to f3, and now Hans plays queen b6, and this is a fairly serious mistake. What Hans should have played was this move b5 to further reinforce the horse on c4, but also to play for b4 and kick the knight out of c3. Instead, Hans plays queen b6, and now I go king to a1. Of course, it's a very important move because say I play knight d4, there's knight to a3, forking the king and the queen, and I cannot recapture, so it would put the king in check, and with it I lose the game. So Here I go king to a1 with the idea of playing b3 so that no longer any forks, and now we have the move rook c7 from Hans. Now this is a serious mistake here. Already it's quite tricky for black to play though, because in reality you'll notice that with this pawn on b7 versus b5, all these ideas like b3 become very tricky, and you can't overprotect this knight on c4, and I'm going to kick it on the next turn anyway. Now the computer says that after a move like f6, b3, and knight e5, black is probably still better, but it's a very tough move to play, and instead Hans plays this move rook to c7, overlooking my next move. Here I play the move b3, attacking the knight on c4, and now Hans plays this move knight to a3. Now the computer says that after rook fc8, pawn takes knight, and knight takes pawn, white is still a little bit better after takes, and queen b2, but it's not over by any stretch of the imagination after say takes, and bishop f8, because there's pressure on the knight on c3, the h6 pawn is weak, and black also has the two b's. Again, in a computer game, probably quite easy to spot this, but for us mere humans, and also in a blitz game where time is low and it's a very tense last round, not something that I would expect. So Hans instead plays knight to a3, and now I go queen to b2, attacking this knight on a3, and Hans plays rook fc8, overlooking this great move knight to b1. Now the reason this move is so great is that I'm setting up the classic lolly checkmate on g7, but I'm also intending to simply capture the knight on a3. So if black takes a knight, we get the lolly mate with queen g7, and if black doesn't take it, he's simply going to lose the horse. Now keep in mind, knight to d5 here would actually lose the game, because black can actually swap all the towers off the board, and after takes, you no longer have the checkmate on g7. So when I go knight to b1, Hans spends a lot of time here before playing this move bishop to f8, trying to stop the lolly checkmate on g7, but now I trade the rooks and I take this free horse on a3, and I have an extra knight, and with it I should win the game. So Hans plays the move e5 here, trying to shut down any lolly mates on g7, and now I continue with this move rook to h1, trying to guard the pawn on h6. Here Hans plays the move b5, and now I go knight to d2. The idea is that this bishop on g3 is a little bit out of play here. You'll notice that it's staring at a dead diagonal, so I want to push f4 or f3 and then figure out how to activate this piece, because it is the one piece in this position that is really not placed very well. So Hans plays knight c6, I go knight c2 to stop him from getting a bastion with knight to d4, and now we have the move queen b6. After queen b6, I play the move f3 here, trying to bring this bishop backwards down the road. Hans plays the move bishop e7, and now I go knight to b1. Now the main reason I'm able to actually play these moves is because since I have an extra piece, I have time to try and replace my pieces or reposition them. When I go knight to b1, my goal is to play knight c3 and knight to d5 here and create a nice little bastion and the connect 5 as well. So Hans plays bishop to e6, and now I play the move rook to d1. We get a5, and I go knight to c3. Hans plays b4, and now I play this move knight d5. Now while this move might not be the absolute best move in the position, the reason I really like this move is because it's forcing black to trade off some material. Remember, one of the things I've said very frequently in my videos is that when you're ahead in material, and in this case with an extra horse, you want to get some pieces off the board, because when your opponent has less forces to attack you with, the better off you are. So after knight to d5, we get bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, and now we have this move knight to b8. Here I play the move rook to f1, and this move maybe isn't best, but I simply want to bring this dark square bishop back to a different diagonal where it will be very active. Hans plays knight to d7, and here I play this move bishop to f2, attacking the queen on b6. Hans plays the move queen to b7, trying to pressure the pawn on d5, and now I play the move knight to e3, protecting the pawn on d5, but also intending to put something on the c4 square. Now it could be the horse, or it could be the bishop. Either way, the goal is to put something here where black will not be able to infiltrate on the c file. Now keep in mind that if Hans were to play rook c3 here, for example, I can play rook to c1, and now I'm going to be forcing another set of the forces off the board, two towers coming off, and after say rook c5 takes, and queen c2, with even less force on the board, there's no chance for Hans to survive this. So in this position, Hans plays the move bishop to f6, trying to go for the big cheese. If I were to play, let's just say, a quiet move like g4, there's suddenly e4 here, and it's uh-oh spaghetti time as the bishop and the knight combine to work together and win the white queen on this b2 square. So here I play the move knight to c4 instead, and you're probably thinking, oh wait, but there's still e4. Now if black were to play e4 here, I can simply play bishop to d4, the queen guards the bishop, and now the knight is also threatening to gobble the pawns on a5 and d6 at the same time. So after knight c4, Hans plays the move queen takes d5, and now I play the move rook to d1, pressuring the queen on d5, and Hans plays the move queen e6, and here I correctly capture this pawn. Now the main thing that I have to be careful about is just dodging any tactics where this diagonal opens up. Unfortunately for me at this point in the game, this is not a difficult move to spot. If black were to play e4 here, for example, actually I should say, sorry, if black were to take the rook, I take and he plays e4, it's very important to not forget that you capture this rook on c8 and win the game. So you play a quiet move like pawn takes pawn, thinking that this endgame is going to be winning with the 2 Bs for the rook, it would be game over after rook to c1, which would simply be a checkmate. But in this position after e4, white can simply take the rook, and after takes, white has a 2 Bs for 2B, white has 2 extra Bs here and will win the game. So after rook d6, Hans plays the move queen to e7, desperately hoping that he can push this e4, push this pawn to e4, push his p, and win the game still. Here I play the move king to b1, and now Hans plays e4. Of course, at this point, the game is already pretty much over, but it's a very important nuanced move here just to dodge any tricks. Now, you might be thinking, wait, but can't black take this knight here? Because if I take the rook, he takes back, and we have even material on the board. That would be true, except that if black plays rook takes knight, I can also sack my rook on d7 first, and after takes, let's just say queen d1, queen c1. I have 2 Bs versus 1 B. 2 Bs are better than 1 B. That is not a question. So after king to b1, Hans plays this move e4, and now I sack the rook with rook takes knight on d7, and Hans plays the move queen e6. Now if Hans were to take the rook after queen f6, once again I'm setting up the vaunted lolly checkmate on g7, and the position is simply hopeless for black. So after rook d7, Hans plays queen e6, and now I play this move rook d6 here, attacking the queen and the bishop at the same time on the 6th rank. And now Hans plays the move queen f5. At this point, he could obviously resign. Probably the best line would be to take. But here I have 2 bishops and a knight for the tower, which is simply way too much material. It's simply a power overwhelming situation. So Hans decides instead to play queen f5, and now I play the move rook takes f6. The queen guards the rook here, and in this position, Hans Niemann resigns the game. He does not let me get the lolly checkmate. If he were to move the queen to d5, for example, I could sack the rook, and once again, we get this checkmate. But at any rate, after rook takes f6, Hans resigns the game. That vaults me to a score of 10 points out of 11. Unfortunately, Alexei Serrano would also win his last round game to tie me for first place, and even though we had the same tiebreaker score, by the second or third tiebreaker result, he ended up getting the win. But nonetheless, I finished in second place with 10 points out of 11. I proved that someone needs to do quite a bit of work if they want to be the first American World Chess Champion, and that is how it goes sometimes. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the Title Tuesday event that I played this morning on June 11th of the great year 2024. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back soon with some more great recaps for YouTube. See you guys. Have a good one. Bye.